Good morning and welcome to Early Exchange with Blessing Aiche, Femi Ayodele, Sam Oruwoje, and Idahosa Osamans.
Still a deficit budget. We're still going to borrow as much as up to 7-9 trillion.
We have a 24-hour rescue team always on standby. So the first thing that is done is for the...
As Nigerians, we must realize that government does not thrive based on what one man is doing at the seat of power.
If I had my way, I would say let's go back and bring back Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation.
This is Early Exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
It's good to know you could join us on Early Exchange today. I am Blessing Aiche. Now, this is the show that wraps up all of this for the weekend. So we're doing a recap of some stories that make global headlines. Some of them, you've heard us talk about them here on Early Exchange in the course of the week, but most of them you have not at all. And so it's a time to take a deeper look into global and, of course, regional happenings today as we wrap up the show for the week. Femi Ayodele is ready and set to help you start your day as you wrap up the week too. So it can be on a positive note and you can pack with you plenty of gains and say, in this week, this is what I've been able to achieve. Femi.
Yes, I'm ready and my morale is high, just like yours. How are you today?
I'm well. And
TGIF, thank God
yes,
it's
thank
Friday.
God it's Friday.
The weekend is loading.
It's
So,
loading, yes, but before you
Owambe
get
this
onto
weekend.
the Owambe, you should be able to draw a table of the wins of the week and say, yes, if it's information you've gotten, that means you're set for the next week to use those information to good.
Don't worry, I have a list of the Owambe happening this weekend. So
please
I'll share that with
share the
you.
Ivies.
Maybe
Share the
behind
Ivies.
scenes.
Share the Ivies.
All right, glad to have you join us on Early Exchange this morning. It's a beautiful day, another opportunity for us to look at global issue, to discuss issues related to the economy. Yesterday we talked about the dollarization of the Nigerian economy, but today our conversation is going to look at the dollarization of the Iraqi's economy. Yes, you heard me. Why do we have to talk about what is happening in Iraq? You know, it's a global issue, and if anything is in the news, it's our responsibility to talk about it. Don't forget you can be part of this conversation. All you just have to do is to join us on our social media platform on our YouTube page. We're also going to talk about the Grammy, the Grammys, the Grammy Award that took place recently, and a lot of expectations about Nigerian artists that will happen. So we're going to have your reactions as well. But let's set the ball rolling with news update. And Juvie is standing by in the newsroom to take us around the world.
Hello and welcome to News Update. I am Juvie Ofiene. The Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, NNPCL, Mele Kyari, and the Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, Olayemi Cardoso, have met to review the decision of the oil company to domicile a significant portion of its revenue and banking services with the Apex Bank. They acknowledge the mutual benefit of this arrangement, particularly in enhancing NNPCL's management of its cash holdings and limits in commercial bank as set by the Board of Directors. In a joint statement by the NNPCL Chief Corporate Communications Officer, Olufemi Shoneye, and CBN's Acting Director of Corporate Communications Department, Hakama Sidi Ali, it was revealed that the bank has provided improved digital platforms and established specific limits to manage NNPCL transactions. Both parties pledged to strengthen their collaboration further to ensure the smooth operations of NNPCL Limited, while affirming that the company will maintain banking transactions with commercial banks as necessary. Away from Nigeria, Liberia's President Joseph Boakai, who defeated his predecessor, George Weah, in November 2023 elections, has initiated an anti-corruption drive by commissioning an audit of 3 crucial government institutions, including the central bank, as announced by the presidency on Thursday. This move aligns with the government's campaign promise to combat corruption and enhance living standards in Liberia. The audit, to be conducted by Liberia's General Auditing Commission, will cover the period from 2018 to 2023, focusing on the central bank, the National Security Agency, and the Executive Protection Service, with findings expected within 3 months. This action signifies the commencement of an audit of government ministries and agencies, reflecting a commitment to transparency and fighting mismanagement of government funds. ExxonMobil Corp has announced its decision to leave Equatorial Guinea in the second quarter of this year, transferring its remaining investment in the country to local government. This move, according to reports, comes in line with the company's long-term strategy following a previous report in 2022 indicating its intention to leave the country upon the expiration of its licenses as part of a broader phase-out from legacy crude assets across Africa. Exxon emphasized its commitment to a safe transition of operations and ensuring the welfare of those affected by this change. The company's oil output in Equatorial Guinea has seen a decline over the years, with efforts to sell its key asset, the Zarifo operation, dating back to 2020. And away from Africa, Germany is set to receive its first shipment of pipeline natural gas from Algeria under a medium-term contract signed between a subsidiary of trader VNG AG and the state-owned oil and gas firm Sonatrach. This agreement, which was announced by the company yesterday, will help to strengthen energy business partnership with Europe. VNG becomes the first German company to procure pipeline gas from Algeria, and the deal with Leipzig-based VNG Handel and Vertree GmbH did not disclose specifics regarding the contract's duration or value. This development comes as Germany seeks alternative supplies following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, which eroded its long-term standing reliance on Russian gas. Algeria's substantial gas production, totaling 106 billion cubic meters per year according to Sonatrach figures, underscores the significance of this partnership. And lastly, the U.S. Senate committee has voted on legislation to bolster safety inspector and air traffic controller staffing while rejecting raising the airline's pilot's retirement age to 67. This decision followed the House vote to increase retirement age. The Senate bill, with a $107 billion budget over 5 years, includes provision for additional flights from Reagan Washington National Airport and consumer-friendly measures like prohibiting airlines from separating families on flights. It aims to enhance airline safety by increasing civil penalties for consumer violations and addressing the shortage of air traffic controllers. Despite not adopting all consumer rules sought by the Biden administration, the bill aims to foster innovation in aviation technology, according to Senator Ted Cruz, the committee's ranking Republican. And that's all there is for now. Early Exchange continues in a bit. I am Juvi Ufiene.
All right, thank you, Juby, for giving us a nice ride with the news update. Now it's time for us to shape policy and advance development with that conversation. We're going to start from Iraq. Well, you may be wondering why we're starting from there. The news is the Iraqi central bank has decided to ban, dollars transactions, for domestic transaction in that country, and the implication of that is for some banks to sit up and also to avoid the issue of money laundering and excessive use of U.S. currency. What will be the implication of this? We have our in-house analyst. Let's see what he will have to say about this development, or the latest development in Iraq. We're being joined by Sam Oruwuje. Glad you have joined us this morning.
Good morning, Femi. My pleasure to be here.
Good morning.
Good morning, Blessing. My pleasure.
Yesterday we talked about the dollarization of the Nigerian economy, and now today we are starting our conversation from Iraq, where the Iraqi central bank has decided to bar commercial banks from foreign transactions, to avoid the excessive use of the U.S. currency. How do you react to this? Then give us a background to this kind of development.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't think it's a complete ban on the dollar. The U.S. Undersecretary under the Treasury Department, Brian Nelson, visited Iraq between 28th and 30th of January, and there were issues that were raised in terms of terrorism financing, and about 8 banks were listed out. So the idea of this banning of dollar usage in Iraq is not essentially for the entire domestic economy, but they're actually targeting Iran, particularly from terrorism financing. So it's an intelligence decision from the U.S. based on the relationship between the U.S. And Iraq. So it's not the entire ban, it's just about 8 banks that the financial intelligence surveillance has captured with a view to be able to uphold the sanction against Iran. So it's not really targeting the Iraqis per se. On the other hand, the same Iraqi government sometime in July last year banned about 14 banks. So with this current regime, so you have about 20-something banks within the radar of the U.S. Financial Intelligence Unit. So, but we must put it in perspective that it's not essentially about the domestic economy of Iraq, but that they are targeting about a specific bank that they think has a link to smuggling of dollar to Iran. And you know the relationship between Iran and the U.S. Since 1958 has not been very friendly. That is not within the purview of this discussion, but we need to underscore the reason so that people don't just say that dollar has been banned in Iraq. Though Iraq has some relationship with U.S. after the last issues they had with the death of their leader.
All right, this alliance between the U.S. now and Iraq in this aspect, do you see it creating some relationship trouble between Iraq and Iran, considering the role that Iraq played in the coming to be of the current government of Iraq?
I'm not too sure about that. Their relationship may not necessarily be so influenced by this decision, because if you look at the entire banking sector and the financial system within Iraq, if you're just taking a radar on about 8 banks, I don't think that will affect their relationship, in my view.
All right, let's look at this effort being made, to tackle financial terrorism. The idea is, if these banks, the 8 banks in questions, have been barred from this kind of transaction, it's going to reduce, the abuse of this currency. Do you see this? How do you see this playing out, and the effect of these on the economy and the use of FX in that kind of country?
I think the news item and what decision that has been made, that 8 banks is just a fragment of the financial service sector. The restriction is only on dollars. So maybe those 8 banks identified that have been banned to trade on dollars, may have some negative impact in the overall business outlook within the Iraqi economy, but I don't think that has a significant impact on the business within that domestic economy.
Now, why is dollar the target? Because those banks that have been banned now from making dollar transaction, they didn't stop them from making transaction in other currencies. It was just dollar. So for the countries that have been accused of dollar smuggling, or areas where the U.S. feels there is dollar smuggling, why is the attention so much on the dollar? Now, if you're being restricted access to dollars, will it in any way affect what they do with it? Can they make that shift towards another currency?
No, I think the point is essentially about economic intelligence surveillance. So the point here is that there's a sanction, an ongoing sanction against Iran. And the dollar is one of the major sanctions that is placed. So the suspicion, or the American government or the U.S. Treasury Department has a feeling that if these banks, based on their intelligence, have some good relationship with illicit transfer of funds, particularly money laundering and smuggling of dollar across the border to Iran, they have a feeling that if you put a stop in terms of transaction, in terms of dollar, within these 8 banks, then there's a great understanding that will reduce. But again, when you talk about illicit transaction, ban essentially does not have so much importance, because across the globe, you have a lot of illicit financial transactions that even cannot be traced.
Let me rephrase. What role does the dollar, or in what way does dollar aid illicit transactions, whether for terrorism or for other unofficial purposes? Because if they're banning access to dollar or try to restrict access to dollar, it must be that maybe it's aiding certain kinds of transaction. What role does it play? How does it facilitate?
No, simply put, essentially, international trade is dominated in dollars. So, and all transactions are essentially done in dollars. So, if you are going to smuggle arms, you're going to do some kinds of transfers, they are done with dollars. So, that's essentially is an instrument of international trade. So that's the reason why they're trying to place a ban on that. But how significant that is a different subject matter.
All right, interesting. Let's expand this discussion so that our audience will understand better. Let's look at all the parties involved. You have the US, you have Iraq, and then you're talking about the interest of Iran now. Now, when it comes to international relations, you have the political side of it, and you always have interest. So paint to us a picture of the interest of these parties that are involved. You have the US on the other side, you have Iraq, and then you have Iran.
Okay, there's a high level of mutual suspicion between the US and Iran, and earlier I mentioned that their relationship since 1958 has not been very, very cordial. There's been a mutual suspicion in terms of Iran financing terrorism, particularly in the Middle East. On the other hand, some 3 U.S. soldiers were killed recently, and the suspicion is that they've been murdered by Iran on the other. So if you look at it from the politics and international relation, or international politics on the other hand, there's always a growing tension. Even America's relationship with Iraq is a different subject matter entirely. But within that conclave, in the Middle East, particularly Iraq and Iran, this suspicion will continue to be there. So like in international politics, there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemy, but permanent interest. So I think the US is pursuing its own interest in Iraq to undermine the growing influence of Iran within that. And there's even a link that some of the things that happen in Palestine and Israel can be traced to some financing from Iran. So that is the tension within the international system among those 3 countries under review.
So what is the interest for Iraq at this point coming to cooperation with the U.S.? Because this they're doing, they could afford it to have said no, they're not banning the banks because it doesn't have direct implication on their economy. But it's the U.S. passing through Iraq to do what they want done in Iran. So why do you think Iraq is cooperating?
Iraq's interest, particularly with oil and gas, have a lot of relationship with the U.S. in terms of export of their oil commodity. Even in terms of their central bank holding in terms of dollar, they have over 100 billion of U.S. dollars domiciled within the central bank of Iraq. So there's a mutual relationship that is essentially about the exports of oil and gas, and that relationship exists with them. So that is the core interest.
On the other hand, do you see it having a better impact on the local currency of Iraq, which is Iraq dinar? Do you think this kind of development now, because from every bad development, you can also have, on the other hand, the good coming out of the bad. Do you see it having a good impact on the use of the local currencies in Iraq?
Yes, in one breath, since there's a sustenance of a business relationship for export and the inflow of dollar into that domestic economy, I think in that respect, then it will impact on the citizens.
So what kind of sanity do you think this will bring to the financial institution in Iraq?
Well, this is based on some level of suspicion based on the U.S. intelligence. So we cannot really put on the table that these banks that are suspended actually has been caught in the web, but then that's the international politics aspect of it. But to what extent it will sanitize smuggling of dollar, illicit transaction, terrorism financing, and all that. That again remains to be seen, maybe from the perspective of the U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East.
Now, looking at the effort to tackle the issue of terrorism or financial terrorism, from the example or the reference that we have now, which is that of Iraq, what should be the lessons for other nations looking at the disposition to this issue of terrorism, the proactiveness, if I may put it that way, in issuing this kind of ban? So what should be the example for other nations looking at this reference point?
If we take it from Nigeria, there were some reports some years ago that certain people were financing terrorism from Dubai, and some reports were released, and as we speak, nothing has been done. So the lesson is that once the economic and financial intelligence surveillance units across the globe are able to pick certain information, then the country should do the needful in terms of imposing sanctions or bringing those people to book based on those reports. So the lesson is that we should take information from the financial intelligence units across the globe so that we can sanitize smuggling and terrorism.
Okay, now that you mentioned Nigeria, Nigeria battles with the dollarization of the economy. Now, an outright ban on some banks making dollar transaction may not be the way to go, but in that aspect, what do you think can also be done as regards curbing dollarization of the Nigerian economy?
The central bank has the prerogative to manage the financial service sector. So I think their banking supervision, in my view, somewhat is weak. So the central bank needs to find a way to manage the assets of this bank in terms of how they trade on dollar. Then two, as a people, we must look inward to consume what we produce locally so that the impact on the foreign exchange is reduced to some extent. So the central bank on one hand has the big stick to control what is done within the commercial banking sector. Then as citizens, we must look inward, we must be disciplined and see how we can consume our own product rather than the over-dependence on imports.
Now, talking about over-dependence on import, because we are relating it with Nigeria, what will be the starting point? Are you advocating for a kind of mass or massive reorientation, and how is that going to happen? Because over the years people are used to foreign products, maybe due to the standard and then the fact that you don't have local substitutes sometimes when it comes to the standard. What's your take on that?
I think the issue of standards to some extent is a bit of international propaganda. I think we need to drop that template, in my view. But then the government, on the other hand, must find a way to be disciplined in terms of consumptions of locally made products. When you have state banquets, the products that should be served should be local products. Then we should find a way to patronize local manufacturing companies in terms of if government want to purchase car. There should be a policy. There was a time in this country in the 70s where Peugeot Automobile was the minimum benchmark for the public service. So that's the minimum. You must purchase cars to sustain that industry. So if we're able to come into quick speed with some of those policy regime that we had in the past, and we're able to sustain them under the current regime, then that might improve on what we're canvassing here.
Let me put this. According to this report, there are some hierarchies who have this impression that this decision is also being influenced by the U.S. That in fact they said specifically that this instruction was given from Washington and then looking at the interest of the U.S. Now, what do you make of the sentiment that the interference of U.S. in the affairs of a country like Iraq? There are some who share the sentiment, and somehow you can't wish away this kind of prejudice.
Is it in Nigeria or
no, in Iraq?
In Iraq?
Yeah, we're still talking about the story.
Yes, essentially, if a U.S. undersecretary within the Treasury Department just visited some few weeks ago, and that decision was made, essentially, is America's influence in the domestic affair of Iraq, and is essentially based on the trading relationship. Oil and gas, that's the main thing. So they have a greater trade of consumption of oil and gas from Iraq.
And you don't see that as a form of interference, as some have shared that feeling?
Well, since there's a trading relationship and there's an economic tie between both parties in terms of trade, then what can we say about that?
Do you foresee a sort of retaliation from Iran to Iraq and even the U.S.?
Though I'm not competent to speak on that, but if my thinking serves me very right, I don't really think so, because there's some kind of relationship between Iraq and Iran within the Islamic states. So I can't say that for sure.
Okay, we'll go on a quick break and return to continue the conversation talking about the ban on some banks in Iraq making dollar transaction after this break. Stay tuned.
My name is Dr. Ajili Tobi. My name is Etemere Glover. Naomi, well done, and shout out to Souq News.
Shout out to Souq News. I want to encourage everyone to keep watching Souq News.
Shout out to Souq News, and yes, tune into them.
Keep watching Souq News. They are one in town.
Hey, we're watching Souq News.
Keep watching Souq News.
Keep watching Souq News. Catch them on YouTube and all social media channels.
Hey, my name is Frank Edowo, and I'm imploring you. No, forget that. I am forcing you, coercing you to always stay tuned to Souq News for your news requirements.
The National Theatre, Igomu, built during the military regime of Olusegun Obasanjo and finished in the time for the Second World Festival of Black Arts and Culture, FESTAC, in 1977. The theater holds amazing treasures and memories. The artworks fill everyone with pride. The National Arts Theatre is visible from the motorway which connects Lagos Island and the mainland. The National Theatre is packed with the artworks of legendary contemporary Nigerian artists, stained glass walls by Yusuf Grillo, sculptures and murals by Lamidi Fakeye, Erabo Emopai, and many others. It was put to full use for a month as one of the 4 venues of the second World Black and African Festival of Arts and Culture, tagged Festac 77. The complex hosted 16,000 participants from 56 African countries and the diaspora in an unprecedented showcase of African music, fine art, literature, drama, dance, and religion. The National Art Theatre was built and designed by Techno Expert Stroll, a Bulgarian company mirroring the Palace of Culture and Sports in Varna, Bulgaria. Completed in 1976, the building is one of the largest and most beautiful of its kind on the African continent. It consists of a central hall with 5,000 seats, a collapsible stage that can be quickly rebuilt, a conference hall with 1,600 seats, 2 large exhibition halls, and 2 cinemas with 800 seats each. The theater complex has a dressing room for artists, a garage, offices, coffee bars, and a buffet. It has indoor TV and radio systems, as well as booths with facilities for simultaneous translation of languages and hectares of lush green lawn around. The majestic structure sits in Igomu like a quiet mountain, mesmerizing visitors and passers-by. The National Theatre, Souq Enlightenment. Good morning and welcome to Early Exchange with Blessing H.A., Femi Ayodele, Sam Oruwoje, and Ida Hosa Osamans.
Still a deficit budget. We're still going to borrow as much as up to 7-9 trillion.
We have a 24-hour rescue team always on standby. So the first thing that is done is for the...
As Nigerians, we must realize that government does not thrive based on what one man is doing at the seat of power.
If I had my way, I would say let's go back and bring back Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation.
This is Early Exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Yes, indeed, we're still shaping policy and advancing development with that conversation. We're still looking at the efforts being made by the Iraqi Central Bank to curb the issue of financial terrorism in that country. And Sam Oruwoje has been giving us his own beat, talking about his impression about the development in that country, and he's still here with us. Sam, glad to know you're still here with us.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Now, looking at this commercial banks that have been barred from this kind of illicit transaction, don't you think efforts should be made to look at individuals behind it? Because in some instances, if you don't go after the big guns, you might not get this thing managed, and it's a matter of time. They will still get back to business. Don't you think they need to take it further to look at the big names, the big brands, and if possible, individuals behind this kind of illicit development? Yeah,
there are certain information that will not be in the public domain. Beyond the 8 banks that has been removed from dollar transaction within Iraq, there are other things that cannot be signposted within the purview of the public. So if there are financial intelligence audits that implicate some people on the trade, then that again will not be in the public domain. I'm sure they will do their due diligence, and whatever further sanction or pronouncement that will be made by the government will not be immediately known to the public. So I think that's the way we can respond to that at the moment.
All right, talking about illicit financial inflows, it's something that many countries battle with, and they try to use the financial system to curb it. But what do you think are the reasons or why it seemed like it's a challenge that is very hard to handle?
All right. You know, there's a two sides to a coin. Just like you have normal financial transactions, you equally have counterfeit transactions. And the financial system is so fluid, particularly when you talk about wire transfer, that's moving money from one jurisdiction to the other. So therefore, because they are not really over-the-counter transaction where people come and do paper documentation, which is easy to track. Some of these things, even though they have a paper trail in some cases, then you have people that do some of those things, and they are called opaque transactions. It has to do with drugs and other illicit gun smuggling and all that. So as long as you have the traditional flow of financial services, then the illicit aspect of those flows will continue to exist as there's a human element in those transactions. But what the government can do is that with improvement of technology and machine tools, I'm sure that some of these transactions will be tracked from time to time, and maybe you're able to bring to book some of those people that are involved in illicit trades and transactions. So it's a very, very difficult challenge across the globe, even though you have interagency collaborations between countries, but then you still have that major challenge. Even in West Africa, you see a lot of inflow of small and medium arms coming into Nigeria, but then over the years, even where we have financial service intelligence, we've not been able to track down the inflow. So, but I think technology will help to reduce that.
What should be of concern to African nations here? Because you might say, okay, this is happening in Iraq, but when you look at the dimension of, terrorism, it has no boundary. Now, for Africans, you somehow play a sensitive role in the continent. What should be of concern if something like this is happening in Iraq to African nations?
Well, until the U.S., who is, in this case, has gone to Iraq to say 8 banks from their radar, these be suspicious in terms of smuggling money between Iraq and Iran. So if any financial intelligence report or surveillance traces some funds in terms of smuggling of dollar into Africa to finance terrorism, once those facts are there, I'm sure that the respective governments will take responsibility for such actions.
But does it have to be U.S. sounding the alarm? Do countries need to wait for the U.S. to sound the alarm?
No, not necessarily the U.S. Once you have some information through surveillance, then those people are able to raise the alarm. So, by the way, because we're talking about U.S. in this particular case, that's why I use the U.S. as a case study. But then, any country that can pick information, and we mentioned in this conversation that there were some reports about some people financing terrorism in Nigeria from the Dubai government. So that alarm was raised based on their own financial surveillance and intelligence. And that information was shared with the Nigerian government. Whatever they do with that information becomes the responsibility and the leadership of that particular country.
Now, I asked the question because you mentioned that the U.S. had not received intelligence about Nigerian banks or African banks doing having such issues as the one pointed out in Iraq. So they can, ahead of time, be proactive.
Yeah, I'm not saying specific term, but I'm answering the question based on the central subject of discussion. So I don't want to get, so I'm saying America, in this case, in Iraq, has this intelligence report, and we're saying you're asking for Africa, whether they are proactive or not, is when you pick information or intelligence that you'll be able to inform those countries. These are the intelligence we have in terms of illicit transactions, particularly on terrorism. This what we want this specific country to do to forestall those illicit transactions like smuggling of dollars.
Let's look at the issue of money laundering, which is part of the reasons highlighted in the story for this kind of development. Now, in spite, the regulation, in spite the education, in spite several efforts being made to curb this development, you observe that people still engage in money laundering. Could it be greed, or what could be fueling this kind of practice, in spite the regulations and the general education about it?
Yeah, when there's corruption, people always find a way to put their loot somewhere. So they look for all kinds of illicit transaction to create a safe haven for their money. So that is a difficult call to make. Why government and civil society organizations are trying to see how you can reduce money laundering. Some people will constantly find a way to take their corruption proceeds somewhere through all kinds of illicit form, so that the money can be moved either offshore or onshore, depending on which side of the divide that transaction is coming. So the counsel here, or the advice here, is that government should firm up their regulatory framework in terms of anti-money laundering. Then officers that are saddled with the responsibility of doing financial intelligence should be up and doing, so that they can track down more illicit funds. So those funds can be returned to their country of origin and to the benefit of the people.
All right, let's move away from the Iraqi situation to the collaboration between Nigeria and Germany in establishing a migrant resource center in Abuja. Lots of people want to travel, or as we see in Nigeria, Jakba. And over time, the dangerous routes that some of them use have been discouraged, but you still find people wanting to go through other routes just to get to Europe. And this time around, the German authorities and Nigeria are coming together to have a resource center where people who intend to travel are educated on how best to do it, giving them information on how to secure jobs ahead. Do you think this is an encouragement to people leaving Nigeria?
It's an encouragement. The German Development Corporation, in partnership with the Ministry of Labor and Productivity, put a center in one small village on the outskirts of Abuja. It's actually on Nasarawa, yes, precisely, but they use the term Abuja because of the contiguous nature of that small town. Yes, that center was developed by the German Development Corporation in partnership with the Ministry of Labor and Productivity. Essentially, is to see how they can train some Nigerians in some specific skill set that will be useful to the German government if they choose to migrate. On the other hand, is equally providing information on legal migration pathway. That's you have about 6 dominant legal migration pathway to Europe, and Germany is one of those. So that center will find a way to educate people on the legal pathways rather than using the irregular ways. So essentially, that center is to help safe and regular migration so that people have sufficient information. So if you are traveling to Germany, you have a visa that can support you for occasional or seasonal work permit. You have the one for study, you have the one for research, you have the one for family unification. So those centers will give you a deeper understanding of how you can migrate legally. Then on the other hand, train certain people in some of the skill sets that they lack so that people can migrate using the legal way. So I think it's a welcome development, and I think such collaboration should expand beyond the one that they just do in Abuja. If we can have about those centers in about the 6 geopolitical zone, that will help to stop the tide of irregular migration, focusing on safe and regular migration, which is a win-win situation for both countries.
Now, the MRS is expected to be like an advisory center Now, what kind of programs, activities do you think should be put in place to ensure that the essence of having this center is justified, and then Nigeria can maximize having a center like this to the advantage of Nigerians, especially reducing the pressure of migration?
I think it's just a migration hub where both the sending country, which is Nigeria, and the receiving country, which is Germany, have basic information. And I spoke to those earlier, talking about the legal migration pathway, which is being sponsored by the European Union, where you have about 6 elements, and most Nigerians are not even of the knowledge of this regular migration pathway. So that center is a place you go to, then you have the right information. You share information. Then 2, there are skill set training within those centers where people can learn basic skills. So in terms of supporting regular migration is beneficial to Nigeria in particular. That will reduce people using the illegitimate way or irregular ways to get out of the country. Over the years, the German Development Corporation will have trained over 30-something thousand persons. Nigeria.
My name is Dr. Ajili. My name is Temere Glover. Naomi, well done, and shout out to Souq News.
Shout out to Souq News. I want to encourage everyone to keep watching Souq News.
Shout out to Souq News, and yes, tune into them.
Keep watching Souq News. They are one in town.
Hey, we're watching Souq News.
Keep watching Souq News.
Keep watching Souq News. Catch them on YouTube and all social media channels.
Hey, my name is Frank Edowo, and I'm imploring you, no, forget that. I am forcing you, coercing you to always stay tuned to Souq News for your news requirements.